Okay, we are now recording. You are on.
All right. Come on. There we go. All right, everybody can see it?
Yep.
Lovely little, oh, I can still see people. I guess I changed it. So when Elsie put the call out that she was doing the symposium, I thought this might be an interesting topic to individuals who either want to come and hear our stories, as some of you are, or some who have young children and are currently in the West Kingdom. So we wanted to give a little bit of our experiences as some of the second generation SCA. And this is just who we are. I am Rose Witha, and we've got Meg here and Brian. And thanks to Hirsch, I was able to download all of our relevant awards and such. But as you can see, we all started getting recognized somewhere around junior high school, I think, at an armature level. And I have the oldest Pelican by just a year and a half, and then Meg was right on my tail. So I started in the SCA at the age of 4. One of my earliest memories at an SCA event is of Brian's mother when she was Queen of the West and she was pregnant. So I've known Brian since he was in utero, and I've teased about that many times. Something that we've all discussed is growing up in the SCA, service was just part of our childhood. We were busy at events. As soon as we got to an event, all the kids go pick up all the sticks and make the Eric nice. At the end of the event, all the kids go out and pick up all the trash because we have to leave the site cleaner than we found it. During the event, list paging, serving at feasts, and I remember being asked to serve the high table for the first time, and I was still fairly young. And I personally think that's brilliant because children are the perfect height for servers. And they don't block the royalty. So you still have visual of them the entire time. And then while we were preparing for this, we started talking about how much fun we had at gate duty, especially at Bort Meadows, what used to be Big Trees.
So for those unfamiliar with Bort Meadows, it's in the Oakland Park system. And to access the site, you pull into basically a little pull out off of the access road. It doesn't look like much because it's just like a small dirt patch of parking. You have to go down like an access road from there down to the actual meadow where the trees and the grass were, where we set up the site. So the gate was actually at the top of the hill, decently disconnected from the camping. So we tended to hang out at the top of the hill using the gate, which perched over a hillside as a swing, as we would wait for people to come by and take their money and sign their names, and I'll have a good time. It was basically the kids' party at the gate at Bort Meadows.
Yeah, and the gate was perfect because it was over a downgrade. So when you swung out on it, you were like way above the ground. But that was, being part of service and being part of a pack of children. Definitely lots of memories at Bort Meadows, being gone for hours and then hearing artists scream lunchtime, and us as a pack of kids would return to camp to eat lunch. But it was a mixed age group. And then while we were talking, I came across the early teen years. It was very, very awkward for me. I was too old to play with the kids, and I was essentially the unpaid babysitter at that point. So I didn't want to do that anymore. And I was too young to go hang out with the teenagers or young adults. So it was the I don't want to be here years, which my mother could probably attest to, where I just sat in camp and moped and complained about having to be at an event. Now, this was something that I experienced, and Brian and Meg shared that they really didn't have those that struggle as I did. And for those of you who don't know, Duchess Ellis is my mother. And so SCA was not only the weekends, it was also Herald's meetings during the week and dance practices during the week, and better not run down the stairs while mom's working on a scroll or you're gonna get hurt moments in our house. So SCA was a regular part of life. It wasn't just weekends. It wasn't just certain events. It was all the time. And then I was fought for when I was a junior in high school and became Princess of the Mist for the first time. And that, I think, really helped me as a transition. I had become more comfortable going to events, obviously before then, or I wouldn't have had a consort at that time. But serving as princess, I think, was a very good tool for me to transition into the role of adulthood. And then literally from as soon as I turned 18 and graduated from high school, I held my first Kingdom office and continued the service as a Kingdom Children's Officer, which I had a blast with. We did Adopt a Peer, where different peers volunteered to take on children, not as a formal apprentice or squire, but to just have that relationship where children could get familiar with different things that you can do in the SCA.
Almost like an internship, I would say.
Yeah, it was short-lived. It was only for like that event or maybe a couple events after. It wasn't any formal relationship. And then we also did breakfasts for the royalty before peerage meetings or in between peerage meetings, where the children made breakfast and served all the royals at Kingdom events. So, you know, we see children as an integral part of the SCA, and every child will have their own experience depending on who their parent is, how involved their parent is, where they find their niche. Not all children stay in the SCA, and that's something I wanted to share as the big sister. My brother got his barony at the age of 9. From William the Lucky, who's in that photograph. And he did not stay in the SCA. When he went to college, he got more and more less interested in the society. And then, you know, another experience that just wanted to share briefly and just touch upon is the fact that we are a community and we are here to help you. You know, the SCA does support each other. If a tent blows over in the middle of an event, people will run and help. If your car gets stuck in the mud, it will get lifted out and put back on the road. Personal experience there. But you also need to, you know, build that community of individuals that you know and trust to take care of your children in the SCA, because you might have the roles that you have and the work that you need to do, but you know, you also need to be responsible for your children. And you know, there was a period of time many years ago after I was Kingdom officers where it was like kids were going into random pavilions and helping themselves to people's ice boxes and stuff like that. And it was very strange, and we had to kind of reinforce that we are a community. It does take a village, but you should also know who your children are with and what they're doing and where they're located at all times. So now I'm going to pass it over to Brian, unless there's any specific questions, and we'll have more at the end for when we're all telling stories.
Let me take a look. Raise your hands in the camera if you have a question. I don't see any raised hands by the button, and there's no questions I see in chat. So I
So
think
you
you're
Right.
said Brian, but it should go to
Meg.
Margaret next.
I was
Yeah,
wondering.
it is. Hi, Margaret.
Okay, so I'm Margaret Brown. Can you hear me? Because that doesn't look like a.
Yep,
Okay, great.
we got you.
Okay. I was born in the SCA. My parents actually met at an SCA event. So my whole existence is because of the SCA. Very, very early on, I was several years younger than Brian and Roswitha, which it wasn't that big of a gap now, but back when you're kids, it's like the difference between having a toddler and having, an almost teenager almost. So that was part of a slightly different generation. Both of my parents were made peers before I came along. So I always grew up with being in a household where service was a thing. And that's what you did. That's part of what helps make an event run, is that, everyone pitch in, everyone volunteer, everybody work. And that's just something that just became so ingrained with the everyday life. And yeah, it was, pick up the sticks when you arrive on site, pick up the garbage when you're ready to leave. My father, for the longest time, would make breakfast and we would serve it to the Royals, my brother and I. And met a lot of people that way. And it's interesting because you get into I remember you from this is how I see you, which is sometimes very hard to get out of. And I'm absolutely certain that both Brian and Roswitha will have similar versions of that story. What I found out, though, is because my parents were both peers, I had to take on more personal responsibility than I think I would have if I had not been involved in the SCA. Because weekends, yes, we're very busy. And, Sunday morning peerage meetings, my parents were gone for 2 hours. So it was very much okay, let's figure out what to do. And, Saturdays being a list page, and I started heralding at a fairly young age. The picture of me up, it's not the picture just of me, it's the one, yes, thank you, Roswitha. I'm being the herald at the Boffer tournament, and I had in fact been doing heraldry work on the field enough at that point that I was actually able to run court. I was about 14 in that picture. I was able to run the Boffer tournament court on my own. And I even had, heralds sitting in the audience going, damn, okay. So you learn a lot through osmosis, through, just being around service. Eventually I got on to doing more heraldry. My father was Kingdom Constable, so I got involved in constabulary because, again, Friday night, everyone's up at gate because that's where you see everybody come in, and that's where all the teenagers and the kids hang out. I became Principality Constable shortly after I turned 18. Their reasoning was, you need to be able to sign things, so let's have you be 18 first. And my first autocratic event was at Bort Meadows when I was 24. I think that might have been one of the coronets that you won, Brian.
No, I didn't win there, but I think I finaled there once
I think, yeah, you definitely finaled there.
against Hansa, I believe.
Okay. Yeah, you're right. I then did things that were more my mother's bailiwick, which was Bardic Works. I got involved in Golden Stag Players, which is more of an art rather than a service, but it involves a lot of herding cats, so a lot of the service got involved. And then eventually I married and had my own kid. You can see a very old picture of him at the bottom there. And one of the things I'm doing is making sure that he is not going into somebody else's tent. Hence the sour look on his face. but I've also tried to instill the ideas of everybody works together to make events and the society run. And my son has picked up on that. His whole thing is, I want to help. And I'm like, great, let's find something for you to do. And when he was very little, and there's a story I'll tell later, it's like, no, I want to come help you. I don't care if I'm only 4. I'm like, okay. So yeah, a lot of my experience is just simply, this is what everybody does. And there's somewhat of a weird disconnect dealing with the outside world, because the SCA, and especially the West Kingdom, is the only family that I've ever really known. I don't have much in the way of blood relations outside. And even then, one of my father's sisters hung out in the SCA for a while too. So, when you go into the greater out world and you go, why are you people being such assholes to each other? Why are none of the kids picking? What's wrong with you? It's an incredible disconnect. And I've taken those experiences and tried to help him raise my own son with, okay, be aware this is going to happen. And it seems to have helped. So, I don't know if anybody has any direct questions for me, or should we just go to Brian?
Anyone who has questions, go and raise your hand in the little video and I'll take a look. And I do not see any questions either in the chat, so I think you're good.
Okay.
Hello, everybody. I'm Brian of Bellatrix. I too have spent the whole of my life in the SCA. Couple of jokes that go along with that. People ask me how long I've been in. My first question is, do you count gestation? Or I also joke about being the first man to sit the Western Thrones without winning a crown. My mom was pregnant with me during their second reign, so I kind of was born into a house in full force. My parents went on to reign several times during my childhood and my adolescence. And so much like my two co-hosts have talked about, the SCA and my service component as a part of that started at home, prepping for every event. Virtually every vacation we took was something long traveled for an SCA event, not to mention almost every weekend. This was back in the day when Antir and Caid were, of course, it wasn't in the beginning of all this, but as I started to become aware of things, Antir and Caid were principalities of the West. And with my parents reigning a lot during this time, they traveled to great distances. As in fact, we talk about our chosen family as people who grew up in the SCA, because frankly, our parents were busy. They weren't our parents at events. They were officers, they were royalty, they were prominent figures, they were founders, they were people who were, coordinating the culture and tone of the West Kingdom and the SCA as a whole. So I struck out at a pretty early age and really kind of, chose a larger pool of family. A very good example of this were the Kendalls up in Lionsgate, which is Vancouver, BC, for those unfamiliar. The Kendalls, the Gerhardt and Amanda Kendall, were the founding Baron and Baroness of Lionsgate, and they had 2 children about the same age as my brother and I. So it was a natural connection to have them as a sort of chosen family. And to the south, it was the Trimbles, Larissa de Griffin, who actually has a similar parallel story to my co-host Roswitha, in that she reigned as Princess of Caid at the age of 12, I want to say, 10 or 12. I forget exactly how young, but still pretty young. They too became a chosen family of mine. So these were our vacations. These were our trips. These were part of our life, going to see these people in extreme distances. And then there was all the time and activity that we spent between events. My father being a prominent progenitor of the fighting culture in the SCA in the West Kingdom, he was responsible for really getting a lot of fighter practices going, both in the South Bay area where we lived at the time, but all throughout Northern California. He even helped get things going in other principalities that eventually became kingdoms. So those were our, in between weekend activities. helping him make armor or, build a tent or what have you. Then we get to the events as once again, my co-hosts have described, it was, you hit the ground running, setting up the Royal Pavilion for me was a pretty common thing. Later on into my teen years, as I became a perennial Queen's Guardsman, I was sort of the historical knowledge that was looked to in how things got set up, because as the guards would kind of rotate through different people, I was the one constant for several years that we knew how to set up said Royal Pavilion. What you got, Margaret?
I remember the one time that I actually was on Queen's Guard, but I had already helped you set up the Royal Pavilion several times because most of the guardsmen weren't there, but I was hanging around. It's like, yeah, let me learn how to do it. So by the time I got in the guards and there you were, and it's like, okay, you I know how to do it. The rest of you, where are you at?
As a sort of aside there, in addition to Royal Pavilions, Queen's Guards were also responsible for the thrones as well. And there was a short-lived set of thrones that we have. Actually, believe it or not, there were two made in this fashion. But a prominent, I'm not going to call him a woodworking laurel because he really wasn't a woodworking laurel. He was a joinery laurel, a period joinery laurel. So he had designed these thrones made out of a wood called Padauk, which is extraordinarily heavy and dense. And these things were really, I called them the jigsaw puzzles of the West. Each throne had 35 pieces that all fit together in an interlocking fashion. And the instructions for the nobody else, I think there was maybe two other people in the kingdom other than the maker knew how to put these thrones together. So even after I stopped serving on guards, I was still looked to set these things up. But this is an example of how sort of like my just presence for a period of time being active in these various activities that were integral to the day-to-day or weekend-to-weekend operations of events was necessary, even though that there were other people, adults, teenagers, older than me, that were responsible for these things. So, and then we talk about, the sort of more general service components like sitting gate and, cleaning up the events or setting up the sites for proper camping and what have you. We knew these sites, we knew these places. We went there, weekend after weekend. We didn't have as many site variances as we do now, or maybe we did back in the 90s. We seem to have kind of retracted on that a bit these days. But we knew what it took to get an event going at each of these sites. So, we get on the ground, we unpack our stuff, and once the family component was taken care of, I was, with the autocrat or the constable or the, marshal in charge or the herald in charge of the event, seeing what they needed done. And as I got older, I would, with my father and family being focused on the sort of martial component of the SCA, my focus, of course, was on the list field and the tournaments and the activities that took place there. So as a young child, I was a list page at every crown. And it was not uncommon for me to be running multiple fields at a given crown. In fact, I remember a March crown back in the days when we were still routinely hitting 100 fighters in the list. We hit a midday of one of these crowns where nobody was available to list page for some reason. The people who had helped for the earlier rounds were either overheated or taxed or had some other commitments to deal with. And I found myself, already doing a couple of fields. I said, well, I'll just do them all. So here I am running through 6 fields, trying to get all the basically running laps around the list field, just kind of handing out cards as I went and grabbing them as I went and getting back. And it was fun for me. It was something I could focus on, and keep busy and really feel like I could contribute to the SCA and the West Kingdom. And frankly, I felt like I could contribute to my family, because to me, the SCA and my family were synonymous, especially growing up, right? There was no unintertwining the two. So it was really kind of ingrained in me as a very young age that, you put your work in, you put your time in, you contribute, you help, and when you see somebody struggling getting their pavilion up, or if a windstorm comes through and knocks it down, you're there helping get it up. There were other situations wherein somebody, like one of the common things that, or somewhat common things that we deal with at a site like Big Trees, Bort Meadows, was there was a surprisingly common occurrence of people falling into the creek, right? So we'd be like a crowd of us getting together and dragging people out and making sure they were okay and have a good time. And it was really, that was the case. I spent very little time, to be quite honest, with my parents or my blood family at events, because they were all busy doing their own thing. So as I got older and as I started to become, an adolescent, preteen, and teenager, whereas Roswitha, she didn't really see an outlet for her enjoyment, and she kind of retracted. I stepped outside of my family and then sought out friendships and relationships outside of my age group and my household. And it was in those times, and this was kind of integral to me too, because it was during a time my parents had split, and their participation in the SCA had kind of gone in two different directions. So I sought out other groups that were active and cohesive and kind of became a part of those groups. And not surprising, I filled sort of a service role in those things. I was the little, fetch and carry guy. But I felt like I was connected and I was a part of these people and these groups. And over time, it's really created a situation where I have a very rich and diverse group of friends and acquaintances that I've developed around the SCA, and not just in the West Kingdom. And that's something that people joke about a lot, is that we can go virtually any event at anywhere in the world, and I will know a handful of people, if not most of the people, and then I can help create those connections. And I feel really fortunate to be able to have done that. As I went beyond sort of those preteen years, my focus, as you can imagine, was on becoming a fighter. I was really very interested in what I was doing there. But I still felt like I needed to give back, because I see how much work goes into making the fighting happen in the SCA. And, whatever you may say, it's clear that fighting is, and it still is, the focus of the activity that happens at most SCA events. But it happens because there's so many people who are not in armor who make it go. So that's when I sort of got into the marshaling aspect of things. I started getting into the heralding of things. I more, leaned towards the marshaling and eventually became Earl Marshal at one point, which was a real privilege, to be quite honest, something I worked towards for a lot of my adult years. And it really allowed me to continue to give back. And then when that was, sort of cruising along at its thing, I got involved in the arts as well. I started learning how to make armor. I started learning how to make jewelry. And then sort of my service component in the SCA focused on regalia. I was integral in helping make the cornets of the mists. I have refurbished the crowns of the West several times. I have repaired and made and fixed all these different pieces of regalia, both principality and kingdom. I've made award tokens. And this was yet another way in a new chapter of my SCA experience where I was able to give back. And so all this amounted to a lifetime of doing all these little bits of service where, one, it was self-serving in that I wanted to have something to do and not be bored out of my skull, but then recognize I can help and give back to those who had given to both me and my family and the game that I really love so much and grew up in being a part of my life. So it was sort of an odd thing when I was offered my Pelican. I just didn't conceive of what I've done in my time as being worthy of a peerage level measure of service in and of itself. Clearly, I felt obligation, and rightly so, to serve the kingdom in the SCA and the principality in the SCA as both a knight and a royal peer. But to really give of myself on a level that was accordance of service level, peerage level service in and of itself was really kind of outside of my framework. I didn't really understand how that could be. And it really took the commentary, the advice, the feedback from so many people I knew and respected who were in those roles to convince me that, what I had done and contributed really, was worthy of that recognition. And to this day, I feel extraordinarily humbled by both the offer of the king and queen and supported by the council, but that of those who I did seek for counsel and respect and to help encourage me to accept that accolade. And that's sort of my story.
Okay,
Oh.
so I will look for really quick for if anyone has questions. And then,
So I have a question for all three of you. And I'm thinking about Edward Le Cavere and his kids, and having been around those two kids all their lives. Again, I knew them in utero. I'm wondering, did any of you because you grew up in the SCA, were you able to have the opportunity to have a quote unquote normal childhood, or any aspects of a normal childhood? Did you do scouting? Did you do any scholastic activities? And Rosewith is shaking her head vehemently.
Well, I mean, I was going to bring that up. No, I did not do Girl Scouts. I really wanted to be a daisy, and I think it was just because it was called a flower. Then look at my name, Rosewith. But
My mother's favorite flower, by the way.
so the only thing that I did as a child that was kind of outside the SCA was my clarinet playing, was the music. But do I feel I missed anything? In a way, yes. I didn't go to house parties on weekends in high school. I didn't do some of those activities because I was around a campfire with a bunch of my friends at an SCA event. So it's not that I missed out, it's just was framed differently. Girl Scouts, all those skills, I no doubt learned them or even exceeded what I would have learned from a scout leader. I know what poison oak looks like. I know what heat exhaustion looks like. I know how to make a basket if I really needed to. But, I learned these skills and it was just framed differently. So, meeting people as an adult and talking about childhood, I didn't go to soccer practices and things like that. I did medieval dance, and I could dance hole in the wall with an infant asleep in my arms and do cut-ins, So there's different skills that you learn, but it's not typical, I guess, as a way of putting it.
So Rosewith, I got a question to kind of dovetail on that.
Yeah.
You speak about how you feel like you've kind of learned those skills and the things that you may have learned in other pursuits such as scouting or other social activities. But the one component, and this is something that I have actually looked back on and reflected on in my childhood, is do you think you may have missed out on a outside of the SCA social component?
Yes, I do in some ways. Yes, I had my very, very close friends in high school and stuff. But to be honest, I'm not in touch with nearly as many of them as I am with members of the SCA, because the SCA, we kept together as a group, whereas high school, you all go different directions. Maybe now it would be different with social media, where individuals from high school would stay a little more connected, in that transition going off to college or whatever we do next in the mundane aspect. But the SCA kept pulling me back every single weekend. So yes, I saw you and Meg almost every weekend when we were at events together. Those relationships have been more longstanding than, let's say, mundane friends I had in high school. Even with social media, those connections, yeah, I'm friends with them on Facebook, but I don't have the relationship as I do with members in the SCA.
Brian,
How about
want
you,
to
Margaret?
Well, I had a couple of things that really stood out because, going through most of the formative years, yeah, my weekends were taken up by going to events or dealing with things around events or conventions that also happened in my life a lot. And also at, both events and conventions, that's where my son, hi, Vincent. Surprise. Where was I? Conventions is where, in events and conventions is where I saw the people that I knew. And while I, dealt with the mundane social sphere as it was at school, I always very much felt outside of it. But I do remember I was about, it was 7th grade, and the school decided that it was going to do a camping event. It was going to go to do camping. And I really wanted to fit in. There was that, because, Rosalita talked about the time where she was, too young to be part of the kids group, not old enough in order to get in things. There was a time in middle school where I really wanted to be like the other kids in my school. And so when this opportunity come up and said, hey, we're going to have a camping event, you're going to go out camping. And it was the same weekend as Beltane. And my parents very nicely said, we're not going to make you choose. You can come with us to Beltane. You can go with the school on their camping trip, your choice. And because I really wanted to try to fit in, I went on their camping trip, and it was an unmitigated disaster. Not only because I was the weirdo outside one, and I was in a pop-up tent. I wasn't, I didn't bring the A-frame, which I could have. There would have been nobody transported. I mean, we're talking very mundane people here. They would have just looked and go, what?
Adam could have, but should have. Oh.
There's a different circumstance that I'll talk about in a second in dealing with that. But I borrowed a pop-up tent. Nobody wanted to interact with me at all. All the things that I thought would be fun to do, because here we are at a campsite and doing all the things like picking up the sticks, get them out of the way, picking up all the garbage. None of the other kids were interested. The adults didn't care. And in fact, some of that really helped because the site that we were at was a campsite above a speedway. It was very, very windy. And because I was not the popular kid, because I was the weird one, all the other kids said, well, can we just put our stuff in your tent so that we can all pile into these other tents? Thanks. So I had a whole bunch of other people's stuff in my tent, which meant my tent didn't blow away. On top of which, Saturday night, they decided to have a fire. Well, at this point, I had already gotten the clue that I was not wanted. So I went to bed early, which meant that I didn't get to participate in the campfire with wood that was just picked up from around the site, which was laced with poison oak. So I didn't get any poison oak problem either on hands, or one girl, her eyes were swollen shut.
I have to tell you, I'm recovering from a horrible bout of poison oak right this moment, and I'm itching just listening to you talk about this.
Smoke in the eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the people there were doing, and there was one guy who was like, "Oh no, I'm totally cool with this," and I just looked at him going, Uncle Fleeg, Uncle Paul, they would just take you out in 2 seconds flat. I was just thinking of all of my uncles in the SCA, because little bit of note, Paul and Carol Bellatrix are technically my godparents. But all of these, dukes and barons and viscounts and duchesses and all that, they were my aunts and uncles. I couldn't get away with anything.
Does that make us god siblings?
I think so, maybe. I don't know.
Now you got a girl in your family now, Brian.
Brother.
Oh, I have a couple of others, but very few. The ratio is pretty skewed.
But the upshot was that I came back from that weekend feeling absolutely miserable and downcast. And then I heard what my parents, my brother, and my cousin who had gone along with them to the event had experienced. It snowed at Beltane. I'm like,
I remember that event.
Good
Yeah.
times.
never again tried to go to a school camping trip.
Screw this
Again.
modern crap.
Screw this modern crap. I want to
know.
have fun with my friends.
A lot of the skills that we got in the SCA, I can, it's translated into my mundane life. So working a conference, with 400 people, easy peasy, not a problem. How to make food and stage it for 200 people, not a problem. Those are skills that I got in the SCA that I've used in my mundane career more than once.
A healthy respect for knives.
I have a question.
You'd be surprised, when you get a bunch of kids together who are used to cooking over a campfire every single weekend and using knives properly. It is amazing when you get one of us versus one of these kids who I've always told, oh no, don't go into the kitchen, don't do that. All of a sudden we're grabbing a knife and doing it, and the adults are going, ah, and we're, what?
Looks like we have a question.
Yeah, I had a question for you. Actually, one of you, I think it was with mentioned that, there's a lot of skills you learned as a kid that you used in your professional life, for example. And I was, I'm interested to know how being a kid in the SCA in your experiences have impacted your personal and professional lives as adults, both inside and outside the SCA.
Who wants to go first? You want to go, Brian?
Yeah. So I'll kind of answer both questions here in my little spiel. So as a really young boy, I was all SCA all the time. I mean, there just wasn't really any time for me to pursue anything else. And really, there wasn't any time for my parents to help facilitate that. Again, since they were reigning so much, my mom was integral in the beginnings of the board. She was, seneschal several times. She was creating the Queen Carol's Guide. I mean, we were all SCA all the time when I was a kid. But when I got kind of into my adolescence, and this is after my parents had split, and so the focus was a little bit more on my brother and I. My parents are both really good about giving me the choice and the opportunity to pursue things either in the SCA, outside of the SCA, or both. So I did a little bit of scouting, but it didn't really stick. I found that I was enjoying myself, at SCA more than that. So after that, I kind of got into sports. In high school, I played a little bit of football, I wrestled, and I ran track. But here was the thing, and this is a really good story to kind of exemplify where my chosen interests lied. I remember coming to track practice one time after a particularly brutal fighter practice. And I had such deep, heavy bruises on my thighs that I couldn't run track. I couldn't run my sprints. I couldn't do anything. And I remember my coach coming to me and he says, because he knew about the SCA. My brother went through his, track team a couple years prior. So he was familiar with who I was and what I did outside of school. And he gave me an ultimatum. He says, listen, you're going to have to choose between your sword fighting and running track if this is going to be a common occurrence. And I said to him, Coach, I appreciate your position, but I am going to continue to do the sword fighting for years beyond anything that I would be doing with running track. So I quit the team at that point. There were other things that I did outside of the SCA and sports. I played a little bit of music in high school. I really got into radio broadcasting, both in high school and college. So those were some pursuits that I did. But, for the most part, I was, when given the choice, I chose to participate in the SCA because I recognized even at a young age that I was building relationships that were going to last me a lifetime. I was learning skills that were going to last me a lifetime. And to answer your question, Seamus, I would say the skill that I learned the most, that I learned the best, if you will, that translates to my professional life, my modern life outside of the SCA, is leadership. At a very young age, I had to take a group of kids and say, hey, let's accomplish this goal. As you know, an adolescent and a teenager, I had to take a group of people and say, hey, let's accomplish this goal. Anywhere from getting the Royal Pavilion set up to attacking a line at a bridge battle, that sort of thing. So I would say leadership, for me at least, is the skill that I learned the best, that is translated the best to modern life.
I would have to, well, Brian's story made me think of the time that my high school swim teacher almost called CPS because I got a bird blunt in my arm and had a bruise from my shoulder to the elbow. And when you tell somebody, no, I'm not getting abused at home, I got hit with an arrow, doesn't sound any better, really. But
well, considering there was actually a case, it's probably want to say about 15 years ago now, where there was a man up in Washington who was arrested because his daughter did actually fight in the SCA, but he also used that as a form of punishment against her outside of events. So
yeah, well, it made me get more armor. But besides cooking for large groups and managing events, being I think what's held over is in the SCA from a very young age, I was watching other children. It became my career in child development, and I run a center now with over 80 children, 6 weeks through age 5. Got education and my doctorate and all that good stuff. And I think it's just that idea of being very flexible in your work, because you may have the best laid out plans for any event that you do, and the wind may come, the rain may come,
right.
A drunk mundane may show up on your site when you're the autocrat. How do you
deal with that?
Yeah. How do you deal with that with grace and business and professionalism and all those PDQs as you stress, but that leadership aspect, that decision making, and then the other piece is public speaking. I hated public speaking back in the day. I would just get so nervous, but you learn, you have your key points and how to present. I still think that,
You think your time as princess was a big part of that?
Well, I didn't have a choice at that point.
That's my point. Do you think that was sort of your trial by fire when it came to your public speaking?
Absolutely. And it made it so now I can do it at a national convention. I present regularly and give workshops and such. So, it wasn't something I was comfortable with, but kind of forced on me, and now I do. And I think, we as a generation, we've always worked, those informal jobs like Maypole. I don't know how many times or how many decades I did the Maypole wreaths.
Or the wreaths.
I was very thankful to hand them over to somebody else after, 2-3 decades of doing the Kingdom wreaths and the wreaths for the Miss.
It's like every time Havek reigns, he comes to me with whatever piece of regalia he thinks he needs me to fix for his reign. It's like, it's not my job, but he knows that I can do it, so he comes to me. Yeah.
And I know there's other people who have been participating as like Christopher and Eden, who were once children or at least youth in the SCA. I don't know if they have anything they.
Well, I was actually, you kind of brought up a couple of other things too. Is I agree with you. You brought up event management. I actually ran concerts and music festivals for years, right? I didn't have any formal training to do that. I just knew how to run events. I knew how to be a security guy who's not going to just go and bash skulls. I knew how to deal with the idiots and bring them around. And yes, of course, public speaking. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
How about you, Margaret?
Well, I also got much better at public speaking because of having to stand up and be a herald, how to enunciate and project. I mean, and it helps, later on when I joined STAGs, and that just continues on. One of the times when I was barred, being able to take head on events, but also how to delegate it and
Mhm.
realize that there are some things that you just can't control. And that you're just going to say, you know what? Everything from here on out is gravy. Things might pop up and be obnoxious, but the whole, getting that mindset of, you know what? Nobody's going to, nothing's going to burn down. We have things in place. And even if somebody tries, we have things in place. Making, the privys are here. They are here. The service is going to come and deal with that. All those little fiddly bits, but also recognizing when, okay, I don't need to look at this job all the time. I could hand this off to someone else and know that I don't have to run roughshod on them. And so when you're dealing with projects, you go, okay, so let's break this up into components. Who wants to do what part of it? Who feels comfortable doing what part of it? And what they're, working with them when they do fall behind, saying, hi, what's the status on that? It's something that, dealing with a group project has to happen all the time. And being in the SCA, you deal with that all the time because you autocrating events, you're always checking in, hey, do all the officers have everything they need? What is the status? Who's here with the pavilion? Has the regalia officer shown up? Has anything happened from outside that I need to worry about? No? Wonderful. Great. I'm going to bed. And just being able
you bring up a very subtle nuance of delegation, and not just being able to delegate, but knowing who you can trust in that delegation.
And Seamus has his hand up.
Yes. Okay. So we have about 8 to 9 minutes or so before the next session begins. That's just an announcement to everyone. So if you are going to either the Go Ask Ellis session, or so you had a, basically a wild idea event planning sort of session, you may go to those whenever you wish to, and they start about 4:10 West Pacific time. And
Do
then,
we need to stop this session to allow for another one? Okay.
Nope. No, this room is your guys' room until we're done recording, and then you guys can stay after that for as long as you want.
Well, I'm good to hang out for as long as people have questions, but if we're also tapering off, I'm not so in need of the limelight to continue either.
No,
Well,
I think you guys are good. I just want to make sure everyone had a chance. That's all. And I'll ask questions all day, so people should ask questions if you have them.
All right.
I don't have a question. It's Narina so much as I remember starting in the SCA when I was about 15 and meeting Roswitha when she stepped up as princess. But seeing Roswitha doing work and Brian and Meg at a young age gave me the confidence in the SCA to know that it didn't matter how old I was, I could still go up and volunteer to do things, where in everyday life, they're like, well, how old are you? I'm not sure you can do this. And so that was really important starting in the SCA.
It's funny you should bring that up, Narina, because I got less of the you can't do that because you're young when I was young than I did when I was an adult. Because there were people who would see me as the 12-year-old well into my 20s.
I didn't have that issue because I started when I was 15. I didn't have the younger. I know Meg did because I remember when she became Principality of the Miss Constable because she took it over from Trelane at that point.
Right.
And people were saying, oh, Meg can't do that. And Trelane was like, oh, yes, she can.
Brian,
he was very happy to hand that over.
What was that, Seamus?
Oh, I just said I can completely relate to you on that.
Yeah.
Well, it sticks with you for a very, very long time. I stepped down as Bard and I was, just, oh, it's over, it's done. And I was just chatting with the rest of the stags and they were just joshing me about, you've done so much and you're only 12. And I was tired and I lost it a little bit. And I said, what will it take to convince you that I am not 12? And Original Nightshade, who of course has no filter, piped up with immediately, yeah, that's easy, sleep with him. And I went, I'm 12.
Yeah,
I still get that. I'm almost 40, by the way, just to let you guys know.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, service can happen at, at so many different ages. My first main going to Crown events, because I didn't go to a lot of faraway camping events when I first started, because I was still in high school, was when James and Verena were on the throne and the Queen's Tea was supposed to happen down at King City. The person running it didn't show up, and Verena turns to me and goes, "You can go set that up for me, right?" And of course, the only answer is, "Yes, Your Majesty." And so you just go and do it.
Yep.
Yeah, it's
Eden, did you have something to say? I saw your mic go off and on.
Bill was
I have
just
to
adding
run
in the
because
background
I've
here.
got a
Pegasus
class.
12.
Alice has a question.
Ellis has to run because Ellis has a class next period that she's running.
Thanks for coming along.
See you soon, we hope.
Good seeing you.
So I know that one of the things that we had tried to do with this, and especially with Margaret as one of our co-hosts, was speak about a second generation participant being a parent to a third generation participant. And I'm actually kind of curious what sort of experiences that you have, Margaret, with that kind of lens, because Roswitha clearly doesn't have any children. And I don't have any children myself, although I do have 11 nieces and or nephews and nieces.
Yeah, I was about to ask, how many are they up to now?
11. And only 2 girls.
Well, I mean, for one thing, there's a very interesting set of things that happens to you, and again, this will apply primarily to the women, but to their males or female spouses. Being pregnant in SCA events can suck.
I've watched it happen. I have
Yeah.
the good outside perspective of what you're talking about.
I mean, I was very particular about when I was willing to get pregnant, because I did not want to deal with what my mother had to deal with, because the way she tells it, she was due June Crown weekend, the year my brother was born. And it was increasingly more difficult for her. In fact, my father built the Viking bed that some of us might remember. I remember jumping up and down on the thing, so it kind of gives you an idea. It was using a pandy at that one time, but that's a different story. But I was fairly far out when we were doing the play that year, and it wasn't the same exertion as one deals with again in events. But if you translate going to a site, unloading, setting up, dealing with the weekend, packing down and moving away while pregnant, it was pretty close to what I was dealing with being on stage. We had a prop backstage. It was the throne, and the rule was if it was backstage and I was backstage, I got to sit in it because I was too tired. But that's not quite where you were going.
No. Well, I mean, it is, but right.
But again,
I mean,
being a parent.
What we're trying to do here is to help people understand what growing up in the SCA is like. So, I mean, clearly not everybody attending had the opportunities that we did, or say Chris did, or what have you. But there are plenty of those who are now parents to second generations. And what can they expect?
Sure.
What can they expect their kids to be dealing with?
Well, especially when you are interested in helping out. I mean, being an active participant. The kids,
Not just being drug along.
Not just being drug along, being an active participant, the kids are going to pick up on that. Like I alluded to earlier, when my son was about 4, both my husband and I were tagged to help out in one of these very period feasts that was set up. It was sort of mid 1400s Italian stuff. And my parents were attending as well, but they were, sitting at one of the tables. And so my husband and I were going to be part of the servers. And my son was a bit distraught because he had nothing to do. And so he came up to me in tears and I want to help. And I did a quick thought and went, okay, how about you help us with what we're doing right now, which was all of the guests were coming in and we were pouring water over their hands, and we had towels for them to wash, and we had a basin to catch the water. So originally it was Walker and I just doing it, the two of ourselves, but we added Vincent into that. He held the water, he held the basin rather. Walker held the towels, I had the pitcher, and after every single person, he had fun flinging the water out onto the grass outside. And he was much happier for it, because, you know, kids really do, for the most part, want to be around their parents when they're very young. So the fact that, no, you stay here while we are doing things in your site does not sit well with a lot of kids. Now, Roswitha, hi, Kitty. Roswitha, with her education background, could probably explain a lot more than that. But as they get older, it's, let's find things of interest in within the SCA, so that you don't feel like you've wasted the weekend. You know, I could have spent the weekend playing video games. You dragged me out here. It's like, okay, let's find something. Let's find something of interest. This does not interest you? Great, let's try something else. But being in an event where everybody's helping everybody else, you know, we as kids picked up on it, and I've seen my son pick up on it. And it's just something that naturally progresses through, in my experience.
Something that I remember, one of my earliest SCA memories was just a little thing. It was Karina of the Far West asking, and it was just, Paige, can you get something for me? And it was something, I can do this for someone else. And it stuck with me all of these years, just to be able to do something for someone else. And a lot of kids will do something, you just have to ask them.
I agree with you. And one of the things that kind of helped me along too was being asked to do the simple thing that kind of carried with it a measure of like either responsibility or import. Like, God, one of my favorite things as a little kid was carrying my dad's sword during a coronation ceremony, for example, or being a banner bearer for somebody, which is something I sought out doing in my teen and you know, early 20s at least. It's still something I look for. Being a part of somebody's important moment is a huge way to garner investment.
Seamus has got his hand up.
He's being so polite.
Yeah, okay, so because unfortunately I'll have infinite questions for you guys, so but the let's see, my question is this: all three of you, so I understand, had parents who are very involved in the SCA, and you guys grew up within that context, but not every youth or somebody comes in and their parents are involved, or their parents go to events. And so you know, what do you guys, how do you think the your experience would be different had your parents not been involved and you went with, you know, somebody else or whatever to events instead?
So when I was still in high school, I remember my mother giving somebody custody of me to take me over state lines to go to an event that she was not going to. As an adult now, I don't know. I would have to know that individual pretty darn good to feel that comfortable to say, here's authorization to take my daughter over state lines. I don't know if it's the generation that we grew up in. The 70s and 80s was a different time now than, you know, the 2000s in general.
I think there's certainly a component there.
Yeah, I think, you know, I don't think I would have been drawn necessarily to the SCA if I saw them on my college campus. It would have been like, oh, okay, they're doing their thing. I don't think I would have sought out a medieval recreation group as a teenager had I not grown up with it personally.
So I kind of agree with Roswitha here. I had a handful of friends over the years, whether they be my friends or my brother's friends. We're about 5 years apart. He's older than I am. That we kind of like, hey, come and do this thing with us. But I think without that anchor of us as fully invested participants in the SCA, I really don't think those friends would have had the rich experience that they did otherwise. I've seen folks come in at, you know, sort of the early teen years and what have you, and without their parents at least somewhat invested, or being sort of in connection with somebody who is very invested even in their peer group, I think it's a hard hill to climb to get them to really have interest.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I have, over the course of my time in elementary, middle, and high school, would invite friends to show up and can come with us to events, and it's like, yeah, we'll drive you, we'll lend you clothing and feast gear and camping equipment and what have you, and you can come out. And it turned into not that much removed from going to a Renaissance fair without having to pay the entrance fee and being able to have a camping trip along with it. It takes an individual who is a lot of the time already very interested in it, or perhaps in those very rare moments find they have an interest in it. It's suddenly a case of it's no longer dry and on the page, it's up there in full color. And those are the ones who want to stick around. So certainly we as growing up in the SCA and inviting our friends along from school can certainly open that as an opportunity. But I can't recall a single time when I invited friends who are enthusiastic, but they never asked to come back.
The one exception I'll give to that is somebody of that age group that comes to the SCA with something the SCA offers that they can't find elsewhere. For me, one of the easy selling points was the fighting, right? Most kids that I grew up with, boys and girls alike, wanted to be a knight, or at least play one, right? So, hey, I got the perfect place for you to come and try that out. Or somebody who's into music, for example, right? The SCA offers a range of musical pursuits that you don't commonly find in your typical elementary school, junior high, or high school.
Yeah, the one person that I know that I met and originally introduced him to the concepts of the SCA already had a certain amount of interest in history, and joined up, did very well. He's decided that, it's not his thing anymore, but he was, well recognized for the work he did as an artisan and as a fighter for many, many years. And, he's gone off and done his own thing now, which is great. But it's not as common.
Go ahead, James.
Okay, so there's two comments I'll read to you guys. First one's from Rivkens Shimon. Thank you for the awesome stories and shared memories. Second one from Alizen. Thank you for all the discussion. And then she says she has to go rest and then pop into Ellis's room. So I just want to share those with you, that people.
This has been fun for me. I'm sure that I would speak for my co-host, but this has been a lot of fun. I always like telling stories.
Oh yeah.
I was going to follow up on Seamus's question, because I had a friend in high school who got into the SCA. She even got into it enough that she registered her name and device. But I think she liked, figuring out a device that she could get, because she really didn't do much more in the SCA besides register her name and device. And then, I've dated people.
Did she go into graphic design afterwards?
I don't know what she did, actually. And then I brought, people I dated into the SCA to an event or two, but it really wasn't their thing. So I didn't drag those teenagers into the SCA kind of thing, even though most of my friends in high school that were my close friends knew what I did every weekend, and knew when I was princess at TYC and I was gone in Texas for a whole week, and things like that. But
dude, I remember working on like bits of armor and jewelry in class, and my friends asking me what the hell I was doing. And I remember coming back from the armor shop, hey, I just finished a new set of arms, and I'm showing it to my friends, and they're just looking at me like, what the hell?
We were making chainmail links in my California history class. And, my teacher, he came over to me one time and he said, are you listening to what we're doing? And I said, yeah, here's my notebook right here. And anytime that I need to write something down, I write it down. And he just went, okay, you're not disrupting. I was in the back of the class. I tried to take woodshop to make a crossbow, but unfortunately the class got canceled. So
I want to share something with you guys. I want to show you one of the first pieces of like armor / jewelry that I made that I did mostly in my my radio class. Hold on one second here.
Your radio
See if
class.
I can find it. Go ahead and continue on. I'll let you know when I found the photo.
Seamus, you had more questions? Narina's still
I will
hanging.
ask you questions all day long. After a while, I'll stop recording though, but I'll keep recording for a little while longer.
I
So-
will say one thing, it is not a good, as someone who had this happen to them, it is not a good idea to register a name and arms for your kid when they are too young to make any choices for themselves. And I wouldn't recommend it that anybody do it until they are much, much older. You know, you can draw what they want on a banner or a shield and just let them go play with it, but don't try to register. My parents did that to me and it was problematic. The
There's
name
actually,
was-
well, I was gonna say, there's actually this, I'll have to look it up, but there's this kid who, in the SCA in a different kingdom, who basically wrote like a guide about like how to, how to get your kids involved in the SCA and what not to do, trying to get your kids involved in the SCA. And that was exactly it. It's like, it was kind of funny example. She's like, oh, so yeah, don't name your kid like Isabel, this lovely sunshine child or something, you know, to let them find if they want to be like Olga, the destroyer, like if they can register that, let them have that. That's the name they like or whatever.
Well,
Yeah,
So,
I mean,
yeah.
my folks just gave me my name and their surname in the SCA, and then eventually I registered it formally. But there was a time when I was in my mid-teens where I actually considered changing my name to Peregrine. But
Remember that.
and then when it came to my device, the way I came up with my device, and it was something I chose up myself in my teenage years as well, is I took elements from my father's device, which is, you know, not surprising, but I also took elements from what my device would be had I used my father's device with the market cadency, which is the silver crescent applied over the device. So I took those elements and created my own device, which I come to find it out is actually a very period way to go about it. The second son was not very likely to inherit anything, especially if the first son had any sons. So it was not uncommon for a second son to not only leave the family, but to seek out another family of nobility, than to you know, become a part of their lineage, if you will. And that's sort of the mindset I had. And later I found out my device had been used as an example of period heraldry at a herald symposium. I was like, oh, well, it worked out.
Well,
So I found that photo here. I'm gonna show you guys real quick here.
okay.
Right, so this is the one of the first pieces of armor / jewelry that I ever made. I made the belt buckle in the background, a background piece there in the shop, and then all the little bronze and copper bits, you know, they're horribly done and they've been abused since then. I was literally with a pair of metal cutters and a file in the back of class, you know, going away at it. And then similarly, in one of the first crowns that I made, I remember working on in college in one of my classes here. Let's see if I can come up with those real quick. These crowns here I made for my brother and his wife for their you know, ducal cornets. All this pierce work that I did, I was literally sitting in the back of like astronomy class in college with a file, you know, just going to town on these bad boys. So did a lot of work in college, in high school as well.
Well, I was getting back to the why you shouldn't do that. When my parents, they did it both for my brother and myself. The names, again, like Brian's, it was, you know, let's take their regular, you know, mundane names and sort of translate them into a more historically themed or flavored name. So my name, my legal name was Margaret Height. And Margrethe is documented because she was Queen of Denmark in the 14th century. So that was easy for me. But my parents were in the group of heralds that really liked puns.
Mm.
So my brother got one that wasn't particularly pun-like, but because he was a very large baby at birth, my mother registered for him a giant African dung beetle as his device. Take that as you will. But with me, because the Greek, my mother is a linguist to boot, because the Greek origin, which leads to all versions of Margaret, including Margrethe, the word for it had two meanings, a daisy or a pearl. So she registered for me a daisy on a field with a blue background and pearls all over it. And that's fine when you're 2. It's not fine when you're, out there trying to, play long shot, javelineering with the boys and you've got a daisy. So eventually I changed it out to this one, but I was allowed to keep the blue with the pearls on it, mostly through grandfathering it in. But it's just, don't try to register. Let the kids do what they will, how they will. They'll figure it out, because we all did.
Well, my first device was so little girl in a lozenge, unicorn heads with their horns crossed, with their necks making a heart, with a wreath of flowers on one and a wreath of leaves on the other. Then I came up with my much simpler heraldry when I was in junior high school. But the name Roswitha, I wanted a flower's name, and I don't know where I found the name, but I was originally called Roswitha of Holerhold because that was my stepfather's house's name. Vernon was Vernon of Holerhold, so I had that. And then I chose Wolfsdaughter because my father's name is actually Wolfgang Amadeus. So I thought Wolfsdaughter was appropriate. And it was about the same time that my brother figured out his name, and he went with his middle name. So his, legal middle name is Damien, and he went with O'Byrne, kind of following my mother. So I was like, I'll be Wolfsdaughter, and took my dad's side of the family. So that's where that came. But that was in junior high that I changed my name and device, but I kept Roswitha. But I think, when I was young, everybody still called me Danny. Just, that's the way it was. I don't know, Chris, do you have any stories? I mean,
well, when they first started, I remember the first time I went out in a tournament, and I was like, 13 or 14, and they said, what name do you want to use? And it's like, I'll just be Christopher, which is all I know, and of Houghton, because that was my dad's name.
yeah.
Awesome.
For a lot of years, the device I used was just my dad's labeled first son. It was easier because I could use his shield and just throw some tape on it, and with the mark of cadency.
Well,
Then when I was knighted, the College of Heralds said, technically when you were given an award of arms, you should register a new device. You can bear arms in your own right. That's since been changed. So I actually do have a different device now that I came up with. I still have the old one registered as a badge for me.
a funny story for you. When my brother first tried to register his device with the mark of cadency, which he still uses, it was denied because my father's device actually apparently conflicts with something in period or something, has some sort of conflict, but it was grandfathered in because it wasn't known at the time he registered it. So then when my brother tried to register the device with the mark of cadency, this is, well, it still conflicts with that thing and you're not grandfathered. I think they eventually, got over that and let him register it, but it's been interesting. And now my eldest nephew is using the mark of cadency as the second heir, using there were different periods of time and how marks of cadency would work. I would normally go with the crescent as the second son, but another common usage was the label with multiple bars not just the 3 coming down to
Mhm.
indicate the second air, and that's the style he uses now.
Recently, my niece, my sister's daughter, who's Robert of Woods End's daughter, Morgan,
Who I only just
Um,
recently met, by the way.
she wanted to register a device that conflicted with my dad's. She wanted my dad's arms with the tower and then Robert's snake knot.
Yeah,
Wanted to use that. And since my father had passed away, the College of Heralds needed something to say there was permission. Since
right,
I had
of course.
a badge with my dad's arm labeled first son, I said, well, I give my permission to use it since it's registered to me as well.
You know,
Okay.
it's my nephew, when he recently submitted his name and device, they had to get my dad to give an actual letter to use the name Bellatrix in his registered name.
Yeah, I'm having interesting conversations because I want to use one of the badges my mother has, and so she has to write something in saying, yes, she's fine.
So, to let you guys know, I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording now, if that's okay. You guys can still
Absolutely.
continue on. So let me go ahead and, is anyone against that?
No, I'm good, and I'm about done unless there's any